Influencing popular culture, politics, and everything in between. The local station takes you ringside as we discuss the crazy world that is professional wrestling. This is Going Ringside with the local station.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Scott Johnson, your host for Going Ringside. Glad you could join us here for episode 10. Last week, we did episode 9 covering the federal indictment of Ted DiBiase Jr. Got a lot of good response there as we analyze that federal indictment. If you want to go back and look for episode 9 right now, you can to learn what is going on with that case. As always, continue to spread the word about the podcast. Tell your family, friends, wrestling fans you may know online. Let them know about Going Ringside. We're trying to continue to get the word out about this venture here. And today we are going to talk about what I think is one of the more fascinating stories in the history of wrestling. It is about a wrestler you probably haven't heard of in many years, but he has an interesting story that has really spawned in different ways for 30 years. That would be Marc Mero. So you may or may not remember Marc Mero. So Mero was Johnny B. Bad with World Championship Wrestling back in the early 90s. He kind of had this hybrid character that was like if you morphed Little Richard and Muhammad Ali, you got Johnny B. Bad. And then years later in the WWF, he brings in his wife to be his valet to the ring, a wife who you probably do remember very well. That would be his wife, Sable, now his ex-wife. We talked to Mero about his time bringing Sable into the WWF and what happened there. And then later on, after he leaves wrestling for the most part, he tells me he was essentially, quote, blackballed from WWE. This was after that tragedy in 2007 that befell the wrestling world. It was the tragic end of Chris Benoit's life. When Chris Benoit in 2007 famously murdered his family and eventually committed suicide. It was probably the most tragic case in the history of pro wrestling. And Mero spoke out about it, was critical of WWE at the time, and he said there was a lot of backlash he faced. So he did all that kind of in the wrestling world, and then gradually over the last 15 years, Marc Mero has changed his life and become one of the most well-known motivational speakers in the entire United States. Speaking many times here in Northeast Florida to police agencies and schools in just recent weeks. So we're going to talk to him about all these things. This is the fascinating story of Marc Mero, the man once called Johnny B. Bad or the Wild Man. Now he's known as a motivational speaker. Well, we are excited today to be joined by wrestling legend and now really public speaking legend, Marc Mero. Marc, thank you so much for joining us today.
Scott, thanks for having me. It's good to see you, man.
It is good to see you too. And we know you from wrestling, but so many people have gotten to know you for the last 16 years in a different light. Tell me a little about where your career has taken you since I think it was 2007.
Yes, I started Champion Choice in 2007, so this is our 16th year presenting at schools all over the country, all over the world, actually. We've been to Russia, Guatemala. It's been just a crazy, crazy adventure. And, it's like, I guess in a sense, I found my purpose in life.
Yeah. What is Champion of Choices? How did you get to the point where you're like, this is something I want to do?
Well, it's all about choices in life. We're defined by the choices that we make. And wisdom creates good choices. And you get wisdom from one of three ways. You get wisdom from books and DVDs. You get wisdom from mentors, coaches, parents, teachers, or you get wisdom from mistakes. Scott, I'm the king of mistakes.
Yeah.
They're really smart. I turn them into learning experiences that I share with other people that they don't have to make the same mistakes that I made along my path, along my journey.
And where do you go? And I want to hit on some of the local stuff here in Florida you've been doing, but just in general, do you go to schools? Do you go everywhere? Or kind of who are you focused on?
My audience is middle school, high school, college, and then we also do corporations and we do churches also.
Now, you're a born-again Christian, and I saw a recent tweet from you where you said you can't talk about that really in the schools. You kind of have to tailor your speaking engagements based on where you're at. Is that accurate?
Well, when you're in a public school, they don't want you talking about religion. They only want you talking about God. And I respect that, but I pray the love of Christ shines through me. You wouldn't believe how many people ask me after the presentation if I'm a Christian, without even saying a word. But also when kids write to me, I can, when they come into my world, I could say whatever I want to say, and I never beat people over the head with the Bible. I think it's one of the things that really turn people off to faith in Christ is just constantly tell them they're going to hell or whatever. It's just love is the most powerful gift that we have. And
well, you have been a lot in Florida lately. I think you were in Jacksonville days ago. You were in Flagler County with the sheriff's office there. I saw you with Governor DeSantis. What has been going on with you in Northeast Florida lately? You've been here a lot lately.
It's just, I guess a coincidence that I've been asked to go there quite a bit. I spoke at Sheriff Wayne Ivey had me speak at I think it was like 11 high schools in Brevard County, and it went so well. So he said to when the sheriffs had their winter conference with Ron DeSantis in Jacksonville, he in St. Augustine, he said, you got to have this guy be the keynote speaker. And I was blessed to be the keynote speaker for that. And that led to other agencies calling me and said, we heard about you over at the winter conference or whatever. So I've been speaking a lot of the sheriff's office.
I'm going to put you on the spot. You saw Governor DeSantis. I've talked about it on the podcast. Did you get the sense he's a wrestling fan? We've speculated.
You know what? We weren't really together. I mean, we were at the same place, but we didn't really get a chance to discuss wrestling.
I didn't think you would. I just had to ask. So I want to go back on wrestling real quickly. So you started really to become to national prominence in WCW as Johnny B. Bad in the 90s. Was that kind of really where it started for you nationally?
Yeah. I mean, I remember I didn't start wrestling until I was 31.
So you were later in life. You weren't young.
Later in life, yeah, and did it on and off for 14 years. So it was a blessing. I mean, I think about all the paths I took in my life, good or bad. They all led to where I am today, and I couldn't be happier, more proud, or living more of a victorious and fulfilled life.
How did Johnny B. Bad happen? Is that because people thought you looked like Little Richard, or how did that come about?
I'll give you the elevator story, I guess. I was one of those guys got beat up on television for $150.
Yeah.
And I was wrestling with another gentleman. We wrestled against Doom. They were the World Tag Team Champions.
Yes, Ron Simmons and Butch Reed. Yep.
And they beat the crap out of us. I mean, I'd be really honest with you. It was,
they were tough men. Yeah,
they were tough. Yes, and who'd ever think that later on in life that I would beat Ron Simmons in the finals of the tournament I was in for the Intercontinental title? But it's just amazing how life happens. But anyways, so after the match, Dusty Rhodes approached me. He was watching me on a monitor because he was the booker back then, and he said, "Hey kid, anybody ever tell you you look like Little Richard?" And I said, and I thought he was talking about a wrestler. Mm-hmm. I said, I never heard of Little Richard. He goes, "You don't know Little Richard?" I go, "Oh, the singer Little Richard." I said, "Man, I never heard that before." He goes, "I think I got a gimmick for you." And that's how Johnny B. Bad started, man.
And it worked. It is still memorable to this day.
I had so much fun. I think the greatest memories I have of Johnny B. Bad is working with Dusty Rhodes as my mentor. Mm-hmm. He would take the time to meet me before the matches and say, "This is what I want you to do. I want you to walk and talk like this and do this and go up to the microphone and say this." And I'd watch him do it like how he wanted me to do it. And I remember laughing so hard, going, "You really want me to do it like that?" He goes, "Yes, I want you to do it just like that," because he was a real flamboyant guy, man.
He had that soul. Dusty definitely did.
He was so much fun to be around. So those are some of my fond memories I had as Johnny B. Bad. And eventually I was able to drop the makeup because I was not real comfortable wearing the makeup because one of the things that, even back then, I was even speaking at schools, and a lot of kids would. One of the questions was always, "But why do you wear makeup?" So I said to Dusty, "I go, Dust, can I drop the makeup?" I go, the character is really over, and he said, "Yeah, let's take it slow." And we did it slow, and eventually I didn't have to wear the makeup, and it was kind of went to the Muhammad Ali Little Richard gimmick. It was kind of fun then.
And did you work your boxing in because you had been an amateur boxer, I think, before wrestling? Is that right?
Yes, and I mean, it was part of the whole gimmick my boxing background. I was a New York State boxing champion for many years, and so we kind of brought that into the world of professional wrestling.
Now, how late were you there? Was it 94 or something like that?
With WCW?
Yeah, with WCW.
I was with WCW from 91 to 96.
Oh, you were there that late.
Yeah,
What
then I went
changed?
over to WWE.
Why did you switch to WWF, WWE?
Well, I always looked at the WrestleMania as the dance. It's like if you ever want to feel like you made it in professional wrestling, it's like wrestling at WrestleMania. That is the Super Bowl of wrestling. And so I always knew I would end my career at it was WWF back then, but I always knew I was going to end my career there. So when my second contract was up with WCW, Vince McMahon flew me up and I went to his home. We had dinner and everything. And I asked him, he said, what's going to take for us to bring you to WWF? And I said, well, I need a guaranteed contract. He goes, we don't give guaranteed contracts.
That was a big thing in the mid-90s, I remember, yeah.
Big thing, yeah. And so we shook hands. We went our own ways. I signed another 3-year deal with WCW. When that was up, he said to me again, he goes, what's it going to take to come to WWF? I said, I need a guaranteed contract. He goes, you're going to be the first one to get one. And I was the first one to get a guaranteed contract, which opened the doors for many, many wrestlers.
Why? And I hear the phrase guaranteed contract thrown about a lot with Hogan and the NWO, and then you and WWF. What does that mean in layman's term? What does that mean to get a guaranteed contract?
The good thing about WWF was paid by the house. We did a lot of shows. So depending on what the arena drew, how many people showed up and how much money it was, let's say it was $100,000 in attendance. It would be divvy up into how high you were on the card to the lowest pay is the bottom of the card of the matches. And so some guys made pretty good money and some guys didn't make real good money. But the bad thing was if you got injured and you were off for months, you didn't get paid very much at all. And it really affected a lot of people. Guaranteed contract, I'd get the same amount every single week, no matter if I worked or didn't work. And lo and behold, I blew out my knee, which I was out for 8 months, total reconstruction of my knee, but I got paid the same every day and it did not sit well with a lot of guys. And, but now, obviously I broke the glass ceiling and opened the door for many wrestlers to get guaranteed. Everyone gets guaranteed contracts now.
One of the wrestlers that we had on one of our most recent episodes was Ken Shamrock. When you were in Jacksonville recently, you say you guys bumped into each other.
So funny. We were both waiting on an Uber at the airport, and we're standing next to each other, and we just turned at the same time. We go, "Oh my gosh!" We just hug each other. We used to really enjoy each other's company when we were in WWE together, and it was great seeing him, man. And he was just so happy of what I'm doing now. He follows a lot of the stuff I'm doing, and he's just such a great guy.
It's a small world. And he told me one thing that was interesting that intrigued me because he had his fighting background. He said he got injured more as a wrestler because you have to do it so many days a week, just long drawn out fights as opposed to like a short UFC fight. Are you surprised to hear that? I mean, you were a wrestler for many years.
Not at all. I mean, I very seldom ever got hurt in boxing, football, hockey. And I've had now 14 surgeries from wrestling. So, I mean, the thing is like, for example, in the NFL, they go to the Super Bowl, and then after the Super Bowl, they're off for 5 or 6 months. In professional wrestling, we have our Super Bowl is WrestleMania. We're at Monday Night Raw the next night. So your body never really gets time to fully heal, and the trauma you take night after night, you don't realize how much you get slammed on your back. And you don't always land right. Sometimes you get tweaked a little bit and you land on your elbow or your shoulder or something. And then it's constant injuries. And that's why so many of the guys were taking a lot of pain medication. And it affected, their health. And obviously it was very detrimental. But I'm proud to say they got very strict drug testing now. And you don't see as many guys dying back in
I was going to ask about that. I've noticed it appears to me just as an observer that wrestlers nowadays look healthier than maybe they were 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, it was a different ball game back then.
So we talked a little about kind of UFC and shoot fighting, that type of thing, which brings me to something I wanted to ask you about because you participated in Brawl for All.
Yeah.
I always wondered about that. And I'm so excited to talk to someone who was actually in it because I've heard a lot of criticisms over the years of it. Tell me about your experience with Brawl for All and what do you think that did for the industry?
Well, it hurt the industry because here you are trying to put on a real fight, a real competition, and it looks so different than when we had predetermined matches.
Sure.
And not only that, but so many guys got hurt. I mean, career-ending injuries, and of course, it destroyed Bart Gunn's career. He was going to be pushed as a major player when he
was, and then until Butterbean shows up. Yeah,
exactly, putting him there with a guy that can really punch, and so it did not do a lot of guys good. And it was I did it twice, and it was one of those things where they called everybody to do it, and you notice a lot of guys didn't do it because it takes a lot of guts to get in there and really fight.
Was it voluntary, or how did that come about?
Well, they wanted everybody to do it, but many guys didn't want to risk losing their reputation, or I mean, think about a guy like Stone Cold Steve Austin getting his butt kicked.
Sure.
He was our main player, so you have to protect certain guys.
I think Dr. Death Steve Williams kind of ran into that because he was billed as just this major guy, and then he loses to Bart Gunn.
Yeah, it was devastating for his career. But you remember these guys that were really tough guys back in the day. It's a different ball game when you get older, and you're used to working a wrestling match, and all of a sudden you have to put on a real fight. You're not trained for that.
Mm-hmm. And so this happens, and you are kind of around the Intercontinental Circuit for much of your time in WWF. Yeah. What was that like? Any fun memories of your time in WWF?
Well, I mean, I was in a tournament for the Intercontinental title, I really very proud of that because I had to beat Owen Hart, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Ron Simmons to win the title.
Yeah,
and those are three of some of the greatest wrestlers, man. So I was blessed to be in wrestling in the Attitude Era, where the locker room, you look around the locker room and there's the Undertaker and Triple H and Shawn Michaels and The Rock, and the list goes on and on of the great names that were there back then. When I first got there was Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan. There were so many great names that I was able to work with over the years. Mr. Perfect. And I mean, when I think about Ric Flair, these names that I got to wrestle and work with were just phenomenal.
And to back up on the Johnny B. Bad, so when you came to WWF, how did your gimmick work? Did you have to choose a new gimmick? Obviously, I'm sure WCW had Johnny B. Bad copyrighted to an extent.
That was the hard part. I think Vince felt that he was getting Johnny B. Bad. And when we found out that obviously we would be sued if we used Johnny B. Bad, they had to come up with a new gimmick. And they came up with this wild man, Marc Mero. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't connect with the character. I mean, really, it was like I was so used to playing something I was so opposite. And now this, like, what am I, from the jungle? And I remember in the meeting, the talent meeting, Vince said, "Can you do like a Tarzan yell?" And I don't got a very strong voice.
Yeah.
Really can't. And he goes, "Oh, okay, well, I just, we got to come with," so they come up with drawings for Wild Man Marc Mero. And of course, part of my contract was I brought my wife in, who at the time was.
Yeah. And I wanted to get to that. So you bring your wife, Rena Sable, in. Talk to me about that and the decision there and how that went.
Here's the thing. Vince, I knew Vince really wanted me to come to WWF really bad. So I put a stipulation down. I said, number one, I want a guaranteed contract, which he agreed to. I want a big signing bonus, which he agreed to. And the third thing I want my wife to travel the world with me. And he said, "Wow." He goes, "I'd never heard that one before." I go, "But think about it, Vince. You can, if you want, we can use her as my valet. So, you're paying for her flights and traveling with me. You might as well use her for talent." He goes, "No, let's just worry about you." And so I was going to fly to New York to sign my contract and meet with the creative team about this character. And he sends me a plane ticket, but there was only one ticket. I said, "Vince, the deal is my wife flies everywhere I fly." He goes, "To sign a contract?" And I said, "Yes." And so he sent me the other ticket. So me and my wife flew to Stamford, Connecticut. And when Rena and I walked in the room, he goes, "I got to put her on TV." It was that quick.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Can you?"
So he had not seen her before.
Never seen her before. Yeah. So he said, we got to come up with a name. So me and her went and looked and thought about all these names. We came up with the name Sable. And that was the name that we stuck with. And of course, she became an overnight sensation.
How was that for you? That the gimmick was you were the jealous. I don't even know. Were you
Well,
on camera
not at
married?
the
I don't
beginning.
remember.
Not at the beginning. No. She was my valet, and of course she's beautiful, and she's
Sure.
getting a lot of the cheers and everything. So it was a natural progression. After I blew out my knee, when I came back, they said, let's work a gimmick where you turn, bad guy, and you really berate her and make fun of her and dress her up in funny costumes and stuff, which the fans hated, but she always came out on top.
Was your relationship strong then, or was it
Oh,
hard because wrestling's so difficult?
no, it was wonderful. I was so, what, I'm on a guaranteed contract. I'm getting paid the same. Now I'm seeing my wife at the time doing phenomenal, and her merchandise is selling only second to like Stone Cold Steve Austin. So it was obviously they're backing the Brinks truck up to our house at this point. So I was so proud of her and happy, and we're a team. We're going to spend our lives together. So,
When
so
she's on the cover of TV Guide, is this next level for you?
it was not TV Guide. It was not just that. It was like muscle and fitness. Obviously she did Playboy magazine many times.
Yeah.
It was just nonstop, and she was becoming very, very well known. So that was never the strain on our relationship. It wasn't until after we left wrestling that we really fell apart.
So you leave wrestling. Was that due to injury, or how did that happen?
Well, no, this is where we go back to my ex-wife sued the WWF because of some improper things that were happening there.
Okay.
And they settled it out of court, and she and I moved to Studio City, California. She wanted to pursue an acting career. She did a couple small movies, but she really missed the wrestling, and so she decided she wanted to go back to wrestling, and I had no desire to go back at that time. So I stayed. I was a stay-at-home dad to our daughter Mariah,
Mm-hmm.
and
How old is she now?
Mariah?
Yeah.
She's 34.
30. She's in her 30. She's 34.
Yeah.
Okay. So
She'll be coming
well?
up this summer when
Okay.
we spend their summers together. We have a great time.
Great. So you don't go back to wrestling. You and then I think you did a little, I think with TNA later on. You did kind of revisit it for a while there.
I did. I went to TNA for a little while, many years after. And so I made a little bit of a comeback, but it wasn't the same. I mean, it just did it for a couple of years, and then just had my last match in 2006 and then stayed retired.
Now, in 2007 rolls around, probably the hardest story in the history of wrestling. I honestly can't think of anything worse than the Chris Benoit story. You became very outspoken on that story. I saw you on the news networks nationally speaking about it. No longer an active wrestler. Was that difficult process for you to go through? Because obviously it is as personal of an issue for, I think, the wrestling community as anything we'd ever seen.
Well, to this day, I'm kind of blackballed from the WWE. I can't go to none of their events. I've never been invited to anything. But I stood up for what was right. There were so many guys that were dying. And with the steroids, the drugs, the pain medication, it just got to be too much. And so I stood up. But I got to tell you, if people like myself and some others didn't, they now have the strictest drug testing, like Olympic drug testing. Now you very seldom see a wrestler die from a drug overdose. They also have where anyone that ever wrestled in a WWE ring can get free drug and alcohol rehab. I don't care who you are or how long you've been out of the wrestling business. Let's say tomorrow I got addicted to drugs and I need to go to rehab. They would pay for it. And that all stemmed from guys like myself speaking up years ago. So even though they may vilify me or blackball me or whatever, I think about how many lives may have been saved because some guys like myself and some others stood up.
Was that hard to do at the time? Because I'm sure you're getting pressure, just as a guy, people, friends and colleagues, that type of thing.
Yes. I mean, yes, obviously you lose a lot of friendships. But at the end of the day, you got to be proud of who's looking back at you in the mirror. I mean, life passes so quickly. And, you just got to be proud of what you do. And it just led to me then going on tour speaking, not necessarily about that, but about in just inspiring young people to live victorious lives, and with bullying and depression and anxiety and many of the things that I endured in my life, I was able
I want
to
to talk about that because I've seen in some of your speeches that you talk about your low points. You had a lot of them that you're very open. You were very open with telling your story.
I think that's the hardest part with people that are going through depression or anxiety or suicidal thoughts is they hold it inside. And when you hold something inside like a trauma, it's like a volcano. And sooner or later, Scott, that volcano erupts, and erupts in often in negative behavior, horrible bouts of depression, anxiety, maybe hurting other people or having broken relationships or feeling like you don't want to be here anymore. So I get people to open up and talk about it. We get over 100 messages. When we go to school, we get over 100 messages from that school. And we sift through all the messages. We find the kids that are depressed or anxiety or want to kill themselves. And I really believe that we have saved a lot of lives getting kids into counseling. But they hear me talk about it, they go, man, if that guy can get on stage and talk to us, talk to all these kids, 1,000 kids, I can go and talk to a counselor or a therapist or someone that's going to help me.
How long did it take when you started the organization in 2007 to where you really were like, this is where I want to be?
You know, it was funny. I after wrestling, I went through some really financial troubles after my divorce and bad decisions I was making in my life. Drugs and alcohol came back with a vengeance, you know. And when I finally got my life straightened out, I mean, didn't have much money left. So I got a job at Gold's Gym as a personal trainer. And it was really humbling because people would walk into Gold's Gym and recognize me from wrestling and say, oh my gosh, Marc Mero, what are you doing here? And I go,
yeah,
work here. And they go, you work at Gold's Gym? And
was that hard? Was that humbling?
You know what? I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed being a personal trainer. I loved helping people. And like they back then they had like this wall of fame, and a lot of my clients were on the wall of fame. So a lot of people wanted to train with me. So it led to me opening up my own personal training studio where I had like 4 other trainers and myself, and we would train people all day long. Well, at that time, I got a call from Melbourne High School football coach. And he says to me, he goes, hey, Marc, can you come and talk to my team? And I said, sure, I'd love to. So I went out to Melbourne High School. I spoke to the football team, and it was strange because a lot of kids would write to me like through email. I left my information, and some of the football players wrote to me and go, man, that really changed my life. It really inspired me. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. Well, unbeknownst to me, they called another school. That school wanted me to come and talk to the whole school. So it led to this snowball effect. And then, of course, my video that went viral, millions of people saw it. And next thing I know, when that video went viral, we had over 3,000 booking requests the first month. At 3,000, we hired
that is like considerable, yeah.
Phones. It was crazy. So we were going all over the world. That year, we did 293 events in 10 months. It was just crazy. But then we were getting letter after letter on how you changed my life, you saved my life, and there's no greater joy than helping another person. And it was like, wow. I look up and I think about all the things I went through. You know, and I tell people, your current trial is going to be your future testimony. Through our struggles, we find our strength. And I found this strength to help others. And I pray I can do it the rest of my life. I really, you know, it's like, I don't want to retire. I'll just refire.
Sure. Are you, if you had talked to yourself 30 years ago, would you have ever put yourself in this position where you're at today?
I never would have seen me as a inspirational speaker. You know, I mean, I only wish I could talk as good as I do now. Back when I wrestled, I probably would have gone up the ladder a little bit faster.
Now, do you keep it? You know, you tell me some of the struggles following the issues with the Benoit and stuff like that. Do you still keep in touch with wrestlers? I think I've seen you still strong with some of them.
Oh yeah, well, Diamond Dallas Page and I are very close friends. He lives, and we're 20 minutes from each other, so we do a lot of stuff together. In fact, the video that went viral, Dallas filmed that. Which,
really?
Yeah, it was really funny because I was living in Florida at the time, and I was speaking at, like, I had 10 different schools I was doing in Georgia, and one of them was close by his home. So, you know, he's got the DDPY studio there, and he's got a whole production team. So he said, do you mind if they go down and film it? And of course, we had a video and photo release from the school, which means we were allowed to film there. And they said, sure. So they filmed it. And DDP goes, hey, bro, we put together this 5-minute video. He goes, you mind if we put it up on YouTube? I go, sure. And he goes, you never know, it might go viral. And sure enough, man, that video just went crazy.
DDP has an interesting story, kind of like yourself. He's very positive guy and kind of really reached out to help people over the years since retirement.
We have so much fun together. I mean, we do the DDPY together. I go over his house and do it with him, and we get in the sauna, or we go in his guy's got that big freeze chamber. I can't remember. It's a cryo
chamber, something like that.
Yeah, we went in that. So we do a lot of cool stuff together. He's we inspire each other, man. It's like, it's funny because I became rookie of the year when I was 31. He did it at 35. I became most improved wrestler. He did it also, and then not only do we wrestle each other, probably, man, I'd say we wrestled each other maybe 200 times, when I was in WCW's Johnny B. Bad versus DDP. We opened up a lot of pay-per-views together, had a lot of fun together, man. And then when I went to WWF, his career just skyrocketed. I mean, it did. We talk on the phone all the time, and I'd see him when he won.
And I wanted to ask about that. So when you're in the other company, were the guys I know we're talking the Monday Night Wars at the time, but were you guys still close, still in touch?
Oh yeah. I mean, the Monday Night Wars didn't affect your friendships with the guys that you used to hang out with, and I still like this Sunday gonna go see my buddy Buff Bagwell. We're gonna be going to church together, matter of fact.
Buff Bagwell at church. That's good to see.
His life has changed so much. So
yeah,
I'm looking forward to that. He's a great guy. He's doing so well right now. I know he's had his struggles too, but man, I'm just seeing.
I want to ask you about that on the church thing. You say Buff Bagwell, DDP is turned his, and I've seen other wrestlers have kind of similar trajectories. Sting, Shawn Michaels, they kind of hit a low and then improve. Is that one of the positives of the wrestling business? Would you say that some of these guys are able to turn their lives around?
Well, it's the positive for the guys that have turned their lives around and gave their life to Christ. There's no greater joy. I mean, I'm so blessed to be a Christian, to serve Christ, to try and do the right thing in life. And I think the greatest commandments are love God and love people. And I love both. I love meeting people. I love helping people. And I see the same gifts in many of the other wrestlers that have given their life to Christ or turned their life around. They just want to help others. They want to, I'm 20 years clean from drugs. I mean, 20 years has
That's
gone
a long time, yeah.
Of drug free, and helping other people that have also struggled, and then seeing their lives change. Now seeing Marcus Bagwell's life change, it's just, he's just such a great guy. He came to my presentation not too long ago. Oh God, last month here in Georgia. And I had 3 presentations that day. So I said, which one do you want to come to? He goes, I'm going to all of them. So he was at every one, and we had so much fun. And of course, he treats everybody he's one of those guys that will never turn down an autograph or a picture. He's just one of those guys.
Well, Marc Mero, this was a treat. We were so glad you could join us today. We'll definitely catch up with you again down the road. Thanks so much for joining us today, Marc.
Scott, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you again, man. Take care.
So glad Marc was able to join us to talk about his time in wrestling and post-wrestling and some of the things he's dealt with Sable, saying that they had a good relationship while they were still wrestling. Things fell apart after wrestling. Of course, Sable famously went on to marry Brock Lesnar, and they remain married today. Then Marc talks about his time and his life change and that struggle with Chris Benoit. And I want to talk about that real quickly. So the Benoit murder-suicide case is one that we're going to be analyzing in coming weeks here on Going Ringside. I'm working on getting that podcast together, so we'll have that coming in coming weeks. It was interesting to hear his perspective on what happened with Benoit and all the time he spent here in Northeast Florida with the Flagler County Sheriff's Office and other entities who have brought him in to speak as one of the most well-known speakers in the nation. So we were so glad Marc could join us to talk about all these things and his life in wrestling, being trained by Dusty Rhodes back in the day, being in Brawl for All, which I've heard so many tales. I was interested when he said that they wanted all wrestlers originally involved in that. So maybe having someone like Steve Austin or Shawn Michaels in the Brawl for All, probably not good for business. just a hunch. But that was our interview with Marc Mero. Thanks so much for joining us today on Going Ringside. We'll be back here next Wednesday. The next episode will drop, and we're glad you could join us. Once again, tell your friends, give me a follow at Going Ringside at Instagram. We're trying to build a presence out there on social media. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone who loves wrestling about Going Ringside with the local station. We'll see you next time.
This has been Going Ringside with the local station, brought to you every Wednesday on your favorite podcast player, on News 4 Jax Plus, as well as the News 4 Jax YouTube channel.